Some people wear a smile like a mask they never take off, and for 3 years I was one of them. My name is Quinn. I am 25 years old, and the neighbors in our exclusive Sedona gated community thought I lived a flawless life. What they never saw was the thick, long-sleeve clothing I wore in the sweltering heat to hide the bruises underneath. What none of us saw coming was that the one person who could finally see through the lie was returning home after 21 years of military deployment, walking straight into the nightmare. It happened at the Naval Base waiting hall. As I reached across the table to grab a glass of water, the sleeve of my oversized coat slipped down. My father accidentally noticed the overlapping dark bruises covering my forearm. I panicked and desperately yanked the fabric back down, but his hand shot out, gripping my wrist firmly. He looked straight into my eyes. The psychological wall I had built instantly collapsed. I broke down crying right there in the hall, finally confessing the truth. I had been violently abused, financially controlled, and locked in a basement by my husband and his family for years. He did not yell or lose his temper. Instead, he frowned, clenched his fists, and issued a command with the cold, calculated demeanor of a military officer who had served for decades. "Pack your things. You are staying with me. Tomorrow, we will play their game. But by my rules." 3 years ago, the iron gate of the Sedona villa slammed shut behind me. Right after our wedding, my husband Mitchell began executing a plan to isolate me from the outside world. He suggested that I transition to working remotely to manage the large property. I agreed to this arrangement. However, his true intentions surfaced quickly. Within a few months, he continuously fabricated excuses about my declining health to my employer. He called my office directly, citing severe stress and fatigue on my behalf. He pressured me daily. He stood behind my office chair, dictating the exact words of my resignation email. He watched my fingers strike the keyboard until I clicked send. My independent income and daily interactions with colleagues vanished overnight. Without a job, my routine shrank entirely to the walls of the property. Shortly after I lost my employment, my mother-in-law Joyce moved in with us. Mitchell claimed she was there to help manage the household, but she immediately assumed the role of a warden. Joyce did not lock every single room to avoid looking suspicious. Instead, she took possession of the master keychain and strictly controlled access to the most essential areas. She locked the garage doors, preventing me from accessing our vehicles. She secured the main pantry, the combination safe, and Mitchell's private office. If I needed a specific ingredient or a cleaning supply, I had to ask for her verbal permission. She would unlock the door stand behind me while I retrieved the item and immediately lock it again. Joyce quickly established a rigid set of household regulations. She monitored my daily schedule and imposed strict time limits on when I was allowed to enter the kitchen. She restricted my access to the stove and limited my oven usage to merely 30 minutes a day. Whenever I questioned these rules, she justified her actions by loudly complaining that electricity costs were rising rapidly. She constantly accused me of wasting groceries, measuring the exact amount of rice and meat I was allowed to cook for dinner. She criticized my management of the family budget despite the fact that Mitchell had already confiscated my credit cards and changed my bank passwords. The psychological pressure peaked one evening when I packed a small bag to leave. Mitchell caught me in the hallway. He pulled out his phone and played a compilation of video clips. The videos were recorded right after he had intentionally hidden my belongings or kept me awake for hours. But on screen, without the audio of his provocations, I looked hysterical. "I have secretly recorded you losing your temper and crying for no reason. If you step out of this house, everyone will believe you are mentally unstable." Mitchell's threat paralyzed me completely. I dropped the bag. He used those manipulated video clips as a weapon to instill a deep fear in my mind. He convinced me that he would show the footage to the police and medical professionals. I realized that without money or a car, I had no way to prove the context of those recordings. The fear of being institutionalized stripped away my courage to escape. A few weeks later, Joyce permitted me to walk to a nearby supermarket. While I was standing in the aisle counting exact change, my best friend Sarah walked past. She stopped in her tracks when she saw my exhausted appearance and the fading bruises on my arm. Sarah immediately grabbed my hand and pulled me into a quiet corner. Pack your things and come stay with me today. You cannot continue living in that house for another day. I forcefully pulled my hand away from Sarah. I shook my head, refusing her offer without explanation. I had to leave immediately. Mitchell had installed the Life 360 location tracking application on my phone, and it was vibrating in my pocket. The application sent him an automatic alert whenever I stayed in one location for too long. The screen illuminated, displaying a text message asking why my location remained stationary for 4 minutes. I grabbed my plastic bags and practically ran out of the sliding glass doors, heading straight back to my prison. In the fall of the 3rd year, late payment notices began arriving in the mailbox. Mitchell's company stood on the absolute verge of bankruptcy. He paced the living room floor every night, aggressively arguing with creditors over the phone. One evening, he walked into the dining area and slammed a thick stack of loan application documents onto the wooden table. He ordered me to sit down and pick up a pen. He demanded that I use my pristine personal credit score to act as a guarantor for a massive new commercial loan. He stated my signature was the only way to secure the funding to save his failing business. I refused to touch the pen. I pushed the papers back across the table, stating clearly that I would not attach my name to his business debts. He shouted, "Punch the wall," and stormed out of the house. The next morning, Mitchell left the property in a rush. I walked into his private office to collect the empty coffee cups left on his desk. I noticed his laptop screen was still glowing. He had forgotten to lock the device before leaving. I sat in his chair and moved the computer mouse. I opened a digital folder labeled with the acronyms of various financial institutions. I clicked through the PDF files and froze. The screen displayed multiple approved loan contracts and credit card statements. The total debt amounted to tens of thousands of dollars. I scrolled to the bottom of every single page. My signature was perfectly replicated on the guarantor lines. He had committed severe identity theft, forging my name to secure capital without my knowledge or consent. I immediately connected the computer to the printer. I printed physical copies of every fraudulent contract and waited for his return. That evening, as soon as Mitchell walked through the front door, I stepped into the center of the living room. I held the stack of printed contracts tightly in my hand. I threw the papers directly onto the glass coffee table, scattering the evidence across the surface. I confronted him immediately. I accused him of stealing my identity and illegally using my name to secure tens of thousands of dollars. I demanded a direct explanation for the forged signatures on the banking documents. My mother-in-law Joyce walked out from the hallway. She looked at the scattered papers on the table and then glared at me. She did not attempt to de-escalate the conflict. Instead, she turned her head toward her son. She needs to learn the consequences of defiance. Show her who makes the decisions in this house. The moment Joyce finished her sentence, Mitchell lunged forward. He grabbed my throat with both of his hands, cutting off my air supply. He lifted me slightly off the floor and shoved me backward with immense force. I flew backward and crashed heavily into the sharp marble edge of the kitchen island. The impact struck the side of my ribs. I collapsed onto the hardwood floor, gasping for air as a sharp pain radiated across my torso. While I struggled to breathe on the floor, the front door opened again. My sister-in-law Clara walked into the house. She looked down at me lying on the floor, pressing my hand against my ribs. She stepped over my legs, completely ignoring the physical violence that had just occurred. She reached into her purse, pulled out her cell phone, and stared down at me with cold eyes. "I have already called Dr. Hansen. One word from me and they will request an emergency psychiatric evaluation and take you away immediately." I remained on the floor looking up at the three of them. Mitchell rubbed his knuckles. Joyce nodded in agreement, and Clara held her phone ready to dial. Faced with their calculated complicity and the fake medical threat, I realized the trap they had built. If I grabbed the landline phone to call the police in my current agitated state, Clara would execute her threat. The authorities would arrive to find 3 witnesses claiming I had suffered a violent mental breakdown. I knew no officer would believe my word over their coordinated lie. I realized I could not fight them with logic or call for immediate help. I stayed silent, forced to endure the physical pain and wait. 5 days before my father's deployment ended, they decided to resort to extreme measures. Mitchell walked into the living room and approached me with a legal document in his hand. He placed a power of attorney agreement on the coffee table, pointing at the bottom line. The paperwork mandated the transfer of the house ownership directly to him. He pressed a pen into my hand and ordered me to sign the document to settle his corporate debts. I looked at the signature line, then looked at him. I reached out, grabbed the thick paper and ripped it directly down the middle. I threw the pieces onto the floor. Mitchell did not pause. He immediately stepped forward, raised his hand and slapped my face with immense force. I collapsed hard onto the hardwood floor. Before I could recover, Mitchell grabbed the collar of my shirt. Joyce stepped out from the kitchen and grabbed my wrists. Together they dragged me across the carpet and pulled me down the wooden stairs. My back hit the steps as they pulled me downward. They shoved me aggressively into the small, unfinished basement bathroom. "You will stay down here until you pick up a pen and sign that property transfer document." Mitchell slammed the heavy steel door shut. I heard the exterior metal deadbolt slide firmly into place, locking me inside. They left me with the absolute minimum resources required to maintain basic survival. A single plastic jug of filtered water sat in the corner next to a paper plate holding 3 thin slices of dry bread. A broken toilet rested against the opposite wall. The basement had no electrical power, leaving me completely in the dark. On the 3rd night of my confinement, the sound of an engine starting broke the dead silence of the basement. I stood near the door, pressing my ear against the cold metal, and listened closely as Mitchell's car pulled out of the driveway, leaving the property to meet a debt collector. A heavy rainstorm had been relentlessly pounding the house for the past few days. I walked over to the opposite wall and inspected the small ventilation window positioned near the ceiling. The constant exposure to the severe weather had heavily rusted the iron screws holding the metal grate in place. I looked around the confined space and found a rusted metal storage rack leaning against the corner. I pushed the rack over, wedging it tightly against the bathroom tiles to create a stable stepping platform. I climbed onto the metal frame, balancing my weight, and reached my hands up to the ventilation grate. I gripped the iron bars and pulled backward with all my remaining physical strength. The degraded screws bent and snapped under the pressure. The metal grate broke completely free from the concrete wall. I pushed the heavy cover aside, lifted myself up, and squeezed my shoulders through the narrow opening. I pulled my legs through the gap, scraping my knees against the rough concrete edges, and tumbled forward. I fell out of the window opening and landed heavily on the flooded grass outside, inhaling the cold night air. I scrambled to my feet and started running. I sprinted barefoot across the muddy trail that connected the backyard to the main highway. The sharp rocks and broken branches cut the bottom of my feet, but I maintained my pace. I reached the edge of the asphalt just as a pair of headlights cut through the heavy rain. I stepped onto the road margin and waved both of my arms frantically. A passing taxi hit the brakes and skidded to a stop right in front of me. I grabbed the door handle, threw it open, and jumped into the back seat, completely soaked from the storm. "Please drive to the naval base. I can pay you double the fare when we reach a safe place." The driver looked through the rearview mirror. He clearly saw my bruised face, my ruined clothes, and the absolute panic in my expression. He nodded once. He did not ask for my name, and he did not ask any questions about my situation. He shifted the gear, pressed his foot down on the gas pedal, and accelerated straight into the dark night, heading directly toward the gates of the military zone. A few hours later, the taxi braked hard in front of the Naval Base guard station. I handed the driver the cash and stepped out. I walked up to the security checkpoint, presented my identification to the armed guard, and waited for clearance. He verified my credentials and directed me toward the main building. I walked past the double doors and entered the main reunion hall. The large room was filled with uniformed personnel and their families gathering for the event. Despite my father serving 21 years in the military, we had always maintained a strong connection through our scheduled weekly video calls. I navigated through the crowd and quickly located him standing near the center podium. As I approached, his posture changed immediately. He did not smile. His military instincts took over the second he saw my ruined clothes, my bare feet, and my erratic breathing. He stepped forward, bypassed any standard greeting, and extended his hand. He took my cell phone directly from my grip without asking. He pressed the power button, holding it down firmly until the screen went entirely black. This action instantly disabled the location tracking software Mitchell had installed. He then extracted the SIM card, snapped it in half, and slipped the dead device into his uniform pocket. He stood right in front of me, observing my body language closely. Several people walked past us carrying metal folding chairs, and a heavy wooden door slammed shut down the hallway. I flinched violently at the sudden noise and took a quick step backward. I instinctively crossed my arms, pulling my wet sleeves down tightly over my hands to cover my skin. "Why do you flinch and step back when someone slams a door, and why do you keep hiding your wrists?" He did not wait for my answer in the middle of the crowded hall. He placed his hand firmly on my upper back and guided me away from the gathering. We walked down a quiet, restricted corridor. He pushed open the heavy door to an empty tactical meeting room. He flipped the light switch, walked inside, and pulled the door shut behind us. He turned the metal deadbolt, locking it from the inside. He turned to face me. He reached out, grabbed the cuff of my coat, and directly pulled the fabric up. The overlapping injuries on my arm were fully exposed under the harsh fluorescent lights. I did not break down crying or waste time detailing the physical violence. I went straight to the facts. I told him about the steel door in the basement and the extreme confinement over the past 3 days. I explained the systematic financial manipulation and the forged loan applications. I unzipped the inner pocket of my damp coat. I reached inside and pulled out a tightly folded waterproof plastic bag. I broke the seal and removed the physical documents I had managed to protect during the escape. I laid the papers flat on the center of the wooden table. I pointed directly at the forged signatures. "I did not lose that money. I have proof of the fraudulent loans and the medical records that I hid safely." My father picked up the documents. He read through each page, carefully examining the forged signatures and the loan amounts. He set the papers back down. He pulled out a steel chair and sat down. He straightened his back, maintaining perfect military posture. He placed his right hand on the table and began tapping his index finger rhythmically against the cold metal surface. He did not show rage or threaten physical retaliation. Instead, he systematically outlined a counterattack. He declared that we would utilize the absolute strictest legal tactics to dismantle their entire operation and hold them fully accountable. He stood up and issued his final orders for the night. He strictly forbade me from contacting Mitchell, Joyce, Clara, or anyone else residing in Sedona. He pulled a metal key from his pocket and placed it in my hand. He instructed me to walk directly to the military guest quarters located on the base and lock myself inside the assigned room. He stated that we needed to secure my physical safety tonight and prepare to initiate a massive legal war first thing tomorrow morning. Early the next morning, inside the private office of my lawyer, Mr. Miller, the thick case file was finally opened. We sat around a large table covered in folders. Lawyer Miller did not waste time with illegal data tracking methods. He had filed an emergency motion with the local judge at dawn. Within hours, he successfully obtained a binding legal subpoena, compelling the financial institutions to release all pertinent information. A courier delivered a sealed box containing the official bank records directly to the office. Lawyer Miller broke the security seal and pulled out hundreds of printed transaction logs. He distributed the paper stacks across the table for us to examine. We began a methodical review of the entire financial history spanning the last 3 years, tracing every single deposit and withdrawal attached to my name. The paper trail revealed a highly organized system of theft. My father had steadily deposited a substantial portion of his military allowance into an account intended for my use. The bank records showed that not a single dollar of that naval allowance had ever reached me. Instead, the logs displayed automated monthly transfers routing the funds outward. We tracked the routing numbers to a private cryptocurrency and stock investment account solely registered under Mitchell's name. I searched through the attached authorization forms provided by the bank. I found a scanned copy of a financial power of attorney document. Mitchell had forged my signature on this critical document, granting himself total legal control over my incoming assets without my presence or consent. Lawyer Miller picked up the forged document, held it up to the light, and looked directly at my father. "We have the records from the bank. He forged the financial power of attorney to siphon off all the allowance money your father sent." Simultaneously, Lawyer Miller finalized the collection of physical evidence. He plugged a secure USB flash drive into his computer monitor. He had issued a formal legal request to the Homeowner Association Management Board earlier that morning. They complied and handed over the raw security camera footage capturing the exterior of the property. Lawyer Miller clicked the play button. The screen displayed the timestamp from exactly 3 days prior. The high-definition recording clearly showed Mitchell grabbing my shirt collar and Joyce holding my wrists. The video captured them aggressively dragging me across the front porch and forcing me inside the house against my will. The footage provided undeniable time-stamped proof of their physical assault and illegal confinement. While we cataloged the video files, the office receptionist opened the glass door. Sarah walked into the room. She did not ask questions or attempt to offer emotional comfort. She walked straight to the table and placed a small locked metal box on the surface. She handed me the corresponding brass key. She nodded respectfully to my father, turned around, and left the office immediately to avoid obstructing our work. I inserted the key and opened the lid. Inside the box sat my original passport, my certified birth certificate, and my social security card. Having these original identification documents secured meant Mitchell could no longer hold my legal identity hostage. My father reviewed the sorted piles of evidence. He looked at the bank logs, the forged power of attorney, the USB drive containing the assault footage, and my recovered identification documents. He stood up from his chair and organized the folders into 2 distinct stacks. He pointed at the separate piles, issuing a clear and decisive operational command. File the physical abuse report with the state police first, then transfer the identity theft files directly to federal investigators. He established a strict division of legal jurisdictions. The local state police department would handle the violent crimes, specifically the physical assault and the false imprisonment charges. Meanwhile, the complex financial crimes, including the credit fraud, the forged power of attorney, and the theft of military funds, would fall under the direct jurisdiction of federal agencies. With the complete evidentiary package now fully assembled and categorized, Lawyer Miller moved to the final step. He immediately drafted a petition for an emergency protective order. He printed the motion, gathered the supporting documents, and drove directly to the district courthouse. Submitting this order laid the concrete legal foundation required to immediately freeze Mitchell's financial activities and strip him of his control. 2 weeks later, 3 police cruisers parked abruptly in front of the Sedona villa. The county sheriff stepped out and walked directly up the front steps. He knocked forcefully on the thick wooden door. Mitchell opened the door with Joyce standing right behind him in the foyer. The sheriff did not offer a polite greeting. He held out a thick stack of legal documents and served the emergency protective order directly into Mitchell's hand. He handed a second identical packet to Joyce. The legal mandate officially stripped them of any right to contact, approach, or communicate with me through any medium. Mitchell attempted to argue, taking a step forward onto the porch. The sheriff immediately raised his hand, halting Mitchell's movement instantly. Mitchell, step back and stay away from this area. This is a protective order issued by the court. Any violation will result in immediate arrest. The delivery of the protective order marked only the beginning of the tactical legal offensive. Following the petition filed by Lawyer Miller, the federal court had already executed an emergency ruling. The judge signed the authorization to freeze all disputed assets connected to my stolen identity. Mitchell walked back inside the house, sat at his desk, and opened his laptop to check his finances. He discovered that his access to the banking portals was entirely revoked. The court mandate locked down his primary business accounts, his private cryptocurrency wallets, and the specific investment funds where he had illegally routed my father's military allowance. He could not withdraw a single cent to maintain his operations or secure high-tier legal representation. The sudden financial blockade triggered an immediate chain reaction. Without the stolen funds to cover his liabilities, Mitchell's business facade collapsed entirely. Debt collectors began calling his personal cell phone relentlessly, leaving dozens of automated voicemails threatening civil lawsuits. The pressure escalated physically at the property boundary. Process servers arrived at the security gate, handing over formal legal complaints from unpaid vendors. By the end of the week, a county official walked up the driveway carrying a roll of heavy-duty tape. The official attached a formal foreclosure notice directly onto the front glass door of the villa. Right beside it, the official secured a bold sheriff notice demanding the immediate evacuation of the premises due to defaulted mortgage payments. Mitchell grabbed his phone, pacing furiously across the living room carpet as he dialed his defense attorney. "They have frozen all my business accounts and a foreclosure notice was just taped to the front door. You need to fix this immediately." The defense attorney could not fix the situation because the federal investigation was rapidly expanding. Several months later, the Financial Crimes Division traced the fraudulent loan approvals back to the original processing source. The evidence directly implicated Clara. She had utilized her professional position to conceal the forged signatures and bypass the credit verification protocols. 2 armed police officers walked into her corporate office building during the middle of the workday. They bypassed the reception desk, entered Clara's department, and approached her desk. They officially indicted her for aiding and abetting credit fraud. The officers instructed her to stand up, placed her wrists in metal handcuffs, and escorted her out of the building in front of her colleagues, permanently ending her career in the financial sector. With his mother facing imminent eviction, his sister under federal indictment, and his accounts legally seized, Mitchell completely ran out of leverage. He sat in a mediation room at the courthouse, staring at the divorce documents prepared by lawyer Miller. The paperwork demanded the complete surrender of all marital property and the unconditional waiver of any financial claims against me. Mitchell picked up the pen, his hands visibly shaking under the pressure. He hesitated, looking across the table at my legal representation, silently begging for a compromise. Lawyer Miller leaned forward, maintaining a cold, professional tone. "Your agreement to sign this civil divorce settlement will not erase the criminal charges for identity theft waiting for you." Mitchell lowered his head in defeat. He pressed the pen to the paper and signed the civil settlement, relinquishing his claims to the assets. He dropped the pen on the table, fully understanding that surrendering the property would not stop the federal prosecutors from pursuing his impending prison sentence. 6 months later, the sound of the judge's gavel striking the wooden desk in the federal courtroom echoed sharply. The federal judge looked directly at the defense table and read the final verdict aloud. The court convicted Mitchell of multiple severe offenses, specifically listing aggravated identity theft, massive credit fraud, and felony false imprisonment. The judge explicitly rejected the defense attorney's plea for a reduced sentence or a minimum security facility transfer. He handed down a strict, mandatory federal prison term without any possibility of early parole. 2 armed federal marshals immediately approached the defense table. They instructed Mitchell to stand up and place his hands behind his back. They secured his wrists in heavy steel handcuffs, confiscated his personal items, and escorted him out of the courtroom through the side detention door. His freedom ended entirely in that exact moment. The legal consequences systematically dismantled the rest of their network. The judge signed a civil restitution order targeting Joyce's hidden assets. The court officially seized a significant portion of her retirement savings and completely drained her linked investment accounts to compensate for the financial damages. Simultaneously, the primary mortgage lender finalized the formal foreclosure procedures on the Sedona villa. The property ownership officially transferred back to the bank. A bank representative and a local county sheriff arrived at the property to enforce the final eviction notice. Joyce had to pack her remaining clothes and personal belongings into cheap cardboard boxes and carry them out to the driveway. The locksmith changed the deadbolts on the front door while she watched. She loaded her bags into a hired vehicle and moved into a rundown, cramped rental apartment located on the far edge of the city suburbs. Clara faced the judicial board next for her direct involvement. The judge sentenced her to a strict multi-year probation period. Furthermore, the State Regulatory Commission permanently revoked her professional financial licenses. She lost her corporate position immediately. Security guards escorted her through the lobby, forcing her to empty her office desk and surrender her corporate identification badge in front of her co-workers. The felony conviction remained permanently attached to her public background check. She lost her professional reputation, completely rendering her unemployable in the corporate sector and severing all of her former social connections. With the civil divorce finalized and the criminal trials officially concluded, I focused entirely on rebuilding my foundation. I sat in Lawyer Miller's office for several consecutive weeks, actively assisting him in contacting the various lending institutions. We mailed the certified court judgments and the forensic accounting reports directly to the fraud departments of each bank. I signed dozens of dispute forms to challenge the forged contracts. One by one, the banks mailed back official letters clearing the fraudulent loans from my name and removing the default statuses from my history. I officially restored my personal credit score to its original standing. I packed my remaining belongings, closed the dark chapter in Sedona, and officially moved to a quiet coastal city to start a completely new life alongside my father. Stepping out of that 3-year nightmare, I realized the most expensive lesson of my life. You must absolutely never hand over the complete control of your personal finances to anyone else, and you must never allow another person to sign debt obligations in your name. Financial independence serves as the most impenetrable shield to protect your personal dignity and freedom. Furthermore, abusers do not change their behavior after the first incident. Your endurance and forgiveness only grant them permission to become significantly crueler the next time they strike. Finally, your true family remains your safest harbor. Authentic love and protection do not require conditions, and they will always step in to pull you out of the darkest situations. Thank you for taking the time to listen and walk alongside me until the final minutes of this story. Your continued support carries immense meaning for me as I rebuild my life today. What do you think about the tactical legal solution my father executed to dismantle their control? Please share your personal perspectives and thoughts down in the comments section below. I am always here, and I will read every single one of them.